It was a Friday afternoon, November the 22nd, 1963. I was a third grader in Mrs. Brown's class at the Brookwood Elementary School in Hope, Arkansas. Shortly after lunch, one of my classmates came running back into the classroom. He'd been at home for lunch, and he said, "The president has been shot." We were all mad at him. We said, "That didn't happen. You shouldn't talk like that." Pretty soon, our teacher came into the room and confirmed what he had said. For the next 2 hours, we sat as little kids in that schoolroom in Hope, Arkansas, like the rest of America, listening to the radio, trying to figure out what in fact had happened in Dallas, Texas that day. 45 years ago, that event changed the world, changed all of our lives. A young president taken from us, a young president who had brought a lot of hope and anticipation for what this country might be. People didn't care whether they were Democrats or Republicans that day. They cared that they were Americans, and their president had been killed. There was one first-hand observer to all of the events of that day in Dallas, Texas. He went on to have one of the most distinguished careers in the history of television broadcast news. He's with us today to remember and to reminisce. Please join me as we welcome Dan Rather.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks. Hi, Governor.
Dan, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
You know,
thank you.
Dan, happy to have you here as I am.
Thank you.
I first of all remember when you covered Hurricane Carla back as a reporter in 1961, and then went on to a distinguished career at CBS. You were in Dallas the day that John F. Kennedy died, and I think may have been the very first reporter to really break that story.
Well, I was in Dallas that day, and our CBS News team, we were the first to break the news that the president had died. One thing I want to say to you right away, Governor.
Sure.
You and I and my wife, Jean, are the only people I know old enough to have gone home for lunch from school.
Well, I'm old enough, and you know, I'm beginning to look like it, too.
Well, it's not true that I've been covering news since Sam Houston was rioting, but I have been doing it for a while.
Let's talk about that day. What was your assignment that day for CBS?
Well, my assignment that day was, and the preceding days, was to put in motion, first of all, to plan and then execute the coverage of President Kennedy's trip to Texas. I was at that time chief of the Southern Bureau for CBS News, headquartered in New Orleans, but because I was a Texan, I was asked to plan our coverage. So I had planned the coverage, and it was my job to direct the coverage. We had anticipated that Dallas might be the toughest, roughest stop because of what had happened there politically before, but nobody imagined the president was going to be assassinated. Thought when somebody might boo or put up a bad sign or something like that. But that was my job, to coordinate our coverage.
There was a full-page ad in the Dallas Morning News with, I think, some people that were protesting some of President Kennedy's policies. And like you say, there was a lot of controversy surrounding his visit to Dallas. But this really was out of the realm that most Americans could conceive, that somebody would shoot one of our presidents. That just didn't seem like that was going to happen.
We all knew our history about Lincoln being assassinated and McKinley being assassinated. But by the time I came to adulthood, it was considered something deep in our past and the kind of thing that might happen somewhere in the Balkans in Europe, but certainly wouldn't happen in our beloved United States of America. And when I say I planned our coverage sort of centering on Dallas, to beef up a little in Dallas, it never entered my mind that anybody would even take a shot at the president, much less kill him.
He'd had a wonderful day in Fort Worth before, and then had gone on to Dallas. Tell me, where were you and what were the circumstances when you first got reports that someone had shot the president?
Well, Mike, I was just past the now well-known overpass. You had the Texas School Book Depository, a railroad overpass, and just past that overpass. As part of our planning, we had film drops. Portable videotape didn't exist in those days. We didn't have it. So we had planned film drops along the motorcade route where people would drop off the film, and we had people to take it back to be processed and put on the air. And it was no big deal. Just before the motorcade was to leave the airport, sort of, I actually think it was underway, I said, well, I could go to the one spot where we don't have someone, back past that overpass. So I was at the overpass. What you have is the overpass and then the now famous grassy knoll and the school book depository. So I was at just the other side of the overpass. I didn't hear any shots. I didn't know that anything had happened. All I knew was the motorcade, a part of the motorcade whizzed by, and I thought it had taken a wrong turn. I wasn't even sure. I didn't think I saw the president. I thought I saw Mrs. Kennedy. It was just that sense, this is not what I expected.
The car was speeding at that point.
It was speeding at that
Yeah.
time. It was speeding. We now know it was speeding with the fatally shot president in it. But I didn't see any of that. It was just, look, this is not the motorcade I expected. I didn't see the film truck which followed behind. So I said, I better get back to our base camp, which was at KRLD Television, the local television station in Dallas. And so when I topped the grassy knoll, there was this incredible scene of people on the ground, people screaming, hollering, people pointing up.
This was how long after the shots fired when you saw the grassy knoll, when you were back there?
Well, I would say no more than a couple of minutes.
Okay.
No more than a couple of minutes.
Immediately after?
Immediately after, because the shots were fired, the motorcade speeded up, came through the underpass. I saw them, they passed in front of me. And I just said to myself, something's happened, I don't know what. But when I got to the top of the grassy knoll, not the very top, but to the grassy knoll, then there was this scene of people screaming, hollering. Men were trying to cover their wives and children. There was great chaos. And basically, I wanted to do the right thing. And that which was, something's happened here, I know not what. And yes, maybe I should have stopped and got out my notepad and take notes, but I was in charge of our coverage, and I thought, well, whatever's happened is going to be pretty big news. And the KRLD studios were only a few blocks away, and so I really raced over there. And when I got into the newsroom, as I said, they already had radio, the police radios up and all that. So, turn the radios up, something's happened. And very quickly, mightily quickly, a whole sequence of events, the UPI put a bulletin out that shots had been fired at the president might have been hit. And things happened very quickly after that, that we had Eddie Barker, a well-known television newsman in Dallas, and a friend of mine was at the Trade Mart where the president was supposed to speak. And somebody at the Trade Mart told Eddie Barker, I know who that person was, but I'm not sure he'd want it revealed, that not only had the president been shot, but that they thought he'd been killed. I think they told him he'd been killed. And doing what reporters do, I dialed the hospital right away. And the switchboards were beginning to get crowded, but I got through and confirmed that not only the president had been shot, but he was dead. And we had a doctor said so, a priest said so, and this person at the Trade Mart had told the KRLD person, Eddie Barker. And so we went on the air with it. There was a lot of confusion. It's hard to imagine. As a reporter, Governor, first you're a human being, and you're an American. This is a terrible hammer to the heart for the country. But if you're pro, you try to keep focused on what you have to do, a kind of laser beam focus. Listen, I can't think about that. I can't let my emotions get hold of me here. I have to do my work. And the official announcement was made, about an hour after the president was shot. And once the official announcement was made, so it's not that you breathe a sigh of sort of, well, okay, now we know as terrible as it is. But what we call the 4 Dark Days in Dallas just started on that Friday.
Yeah, that's right.
The Zapruder film, which with the help of my CBS News team and the people at the local station, KRLD, we actually found Zapruder, Mr. Zapruder.
That day?
That night.
That night.
That night. He had a home movie camera.
Right.
We found him. And then, of course, on Sunday, the assassin was assassinated, if you can believe it. And then on Monday, the funeral for the president. But what a time.
It was a remarkable time in America, and we're going to talk more about that when we come back from the break. More on the remembrance and reminiscing of that fateful day in Dallas, Texas, 45 years ago this weekend, with our guest Dan Rather in just a moment.
This is Dan Rather at the now infamous corner. The corner window just below the top floor is where the assassin stuck out his 30.
She had a terrible.
We're back with Dan Rather. We're talking and remembering 45 years ago, the terrible day in Dallas. You mentioned the Zapruder film just before we went to the break. That film was probably the single most important piece of evidence. For a long time, it was sequestered. It is again, interestingly, but there was a period of time it was in the public domain. You were, however, one of the very first people to see the film shot by Abraham Zapruder.
Well, that's true. Having said we've contacted Mr. Zapruder, found him, helped him get it processed. And by the next morning, he hired a lawyer. And I went over to the lawyer's office, and I was disappointed because Dick Stolley, a great reporter for Time Life magazine, was there. I had hoped nobody else would be there, of course. And the situation was the lawyer said, we're going to show you this film one time and one time only, right here in the office. And immediately afterward, we will accept bids for the purchase of the film. And they put it up in the lawyer's office up against a wall. Incredible. See the scene.
Yeah.
The president has been assassinated. The country is in deep wonderment questioning. Anyway, you know, my eyes just bulged out. And when it was over, it only lasted about 21, 22 seconds, I think. I just almost took the hinges off the door and said as I raced out, I'll be back and give you our bid later, and I hope you won't do anything until I get back. And I went a few blocks back to the station. This sounds archaic, but television was not those days what it is today, and described what I had seen. I didn't take any notes. I just, from memory, described what I had seen. And then after that, they replayed it almost immediately. But by the time I got back to the lawyer's office, my worst fears were realized that Dick Stolley had made a preemptive bid. What they paid for it, I don't know, but the lawyer told me, I said, well, I'm ready to talk money. CBS, he said to me, we'll give you a top of $10,000. And he said, I didn't even get to say that. He just said, Time Life has bought it. I know they paid high six figures for it, and I think it was a lot of money. But they did take it back. They wouldn't allow us to play it on television. As you say, for a long time they kept it sequestered until they could print in Life magazine the photographs.
Dan, if that event were to happen today, how would television cover it differently? I mean, obviously, technologically, they would cover it differently because of cell phones and instant cameras. But from a journalistic standpoint, would it be a different approach to the Kennedy assassination if it happened today?
Yes, Mike, it would be. First of all, there would be so many more reporters covering it today, so many more outlets. In those days, we had the big two, CBS and NBC. ABC was not fully developed as a news network at that time. And today, they would unquestionably be 24 full-fledged outfits. There'd be many more reporters covering it. The reportage would be instantaneous. You would have everybody on the set all the time. And that we didn't have satellite coverage at that time, but it would be completely different. But I think journalistically, at its core, its DNA, the journalism would be very similar. It is, you want to be accurate, you want to be fair, but you also want to be fast.
We only have about 30 seconds. You're one of the few people in television that really know what 30 seconds means. But would there be a rush to get it on the air without the kind of editing process that I think may have existed at that time, without a thoughtful review of what do we really have and what are our sources? On
that kind of story, it would be a lot about speed. There would not be very much editing beforehand.
Dan, one thing I think we certainly all feel, anybody who was alive at that time will never forget those days. I know I won't. I know you won't. You were there in the middle of it in a way that most of us can't even imagine. Thank you for coming to share and to reminisce with me today.
Thank you so very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
An absolute giant of the news business, Dan Rather, there that day in Dallas, assassination of John F. Kennedy, a day that will forever change all of us and certainly changed America. Well, coming up, some closing thoughts, and the Little Rockers will be with us.